Welcome to Life-Changing Challengers, the podcast where passion meets purpose. I'm Brad Minus, your host, guiding you through stories of transformation and triumph, from endurance feats to overcoming adversity. Our guests defy the limits and inspire action. Ready to ignite your desire and incinerate your barriers? Join us. Your journey to the extraordinary begins now. And welcome back to another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. Again, I'm your host, Brad Minus, and I am very lucky to have the queen of life coaching, Sabine Schoepke. She's a life coach, she's an author, she's a podcaster, she's an entrepreneurial coach. The woman does everything, and she's a bodybuilder. Who would have thought, right? So welcome, Sabine. How are you doing today?
I am so good. Thank you. It's so nice to be on your show. Thanks for having me.
Oh, I appreciate it, and thank you for joining us. So let's just dive right in. So can you tell us a little bit about your childhood, your background, where you grew up, and like the compliment to your family, a typical day growing up, hardships, successes, any of that stuff?
So I'm originally from Germany. I left Germany on my own when I was 17 with the desire to learn another language. And I went to Canada by myself. And I really enjoyed that. I really enjoyed being on my own and learning the language and being challenged like that. And I decided to stay, which my parents said, nope, you have two other siblings. We can't afford it because it's very expensive to send your kids into international schools. And you got to come back. And I said, no, I'm not coming back. And so I tried to figure it out myself. And I got a scholarship after the first year that tied me over for a couple of years. And then I wanted to go to university in Canada. I had big dreams of becoming a businesswoman and going to business school in Canada. So yeah,
hang on 1 second. You're starting me off at 17. At 17, I got one more year and you're an adult. I asked you about your childhood.
I know
about Germany. You're talking to Americans here. We want to know what it's like to grow up in a different country.
It was pretty uneventful. Like I have two brothers that are younger, and my father especially was always very much into languages, so he supported me going overseas. I grew up in southern Germany in Nuremberg, which is about an hour north of Munich, and I spent all of my summers and winters actually in the German Alps, which is going to be significant later on to when we talk about the rest of my story. And yeah, I love the German Alps. And yeah, and then at 17, they're like, go.
And you decided to go to Canada. So growing up, what did your dad do?
My dad was pretty much a consultant. Both of my parents were self-employed. They had various businesses, and he was a consultant for international companies. And he loved the travel. He loved the languages and always tried to instill that in us. And the entrepreneurial spirit really was instilled through both of my parents. And so,
all right. That's great. Just to give us a little bit of a taste. Right? Okay, so you decided to go to university. And where was that?
That was in London, Ontario. So that was about 2.5 hours west of Toronto. But so because my parents did not want to really or couldn't financially support this, I said, I'm going to do this on my own. And I didn't really share much with them how I did it, but I ended up starting my first business at 19. And when I started it, though, I was completely broke. I was homeless in Toronto, in a park in downtown Toronto. And I started my first business on a park bench. And the thing is, because of my upbringing and because seeing my parents, I feel like I always had the mindset to see opportunities. And at that point, I knew what it is that I wanted to do. I saw opportunity by traveling back and forth between the two continents in buying merchandise in North America and bringing it over to Europe. And really, all of my friends at the time were like, can you bring me a pair of Levi's? That was really the decisive thing, the Levi's. And then I was like, how about I bring a lot of Levi's and I sell them over there? So that was my idea back then. And I started to set up a network of buying branded goods at the time in Canada, buying them from retailers and then filling entire aircrafts with that and sending them over to Europe And then I got my parents involved in that. And I said, why don't you distribute this over there? So that's really what I did at 19.
You did. So you basically did retail arbitrage.
I did what they call gray market. So gray market is when you purchase goods and you don't have the official, like I didn't have the license to sell them overseas, but I didn't really care. I was like, okay, stop me, which they did along the way. As the business grew, they did try to stop me. And because it became so big that I was very disruptive in the European market. And then I spread it out into different goods, from Levi's to other clothing brands to workout equipment to bicycles to barbecues, like whatever you can think of. Wherever I saw an opportunity, I'm like, I'm shipping this. And I did. And yeah, it was a phenomenal business. And it paid for my schooling, and I got my brothers involved. And then they came over and I helped them to get started over there. And then I realized I went to school, I went to business school, I graduated, and 4 years later, and then I was like, I don't need a job. I have a job. And so I got job offers and I never took a job. I thought it was crazy. Like the money they offered me, I'm like, oh, I'm not doing this. I'm way better off. I'm traveling. I'm doing whatever I want to do. And I have the freedom already, and the money is a joke. So I'm going to keep doing what I'm doing. And then I expanded the business from Toronto into North America, into California, really. And I started to actually build my own, because before I was just buying from retailers, and I was like, what about cutting out the middleman? And so I started to set up my own retail locations, and I bought it directly from the manufacturers and expanded into pretty much the entire West Coast.
Oh my God. All right. So we got to step another minute. All right. Because got questions. All right. How does a 19-year-old broke and homeless get capital to start buying, retailing, and shipping it overseas?
So that's the beautiful thing. And that's, at the time, I didn't know this, but I always followed my heart and I followed my gut. I think that's what really helped me. Like, looking back now, I think that was really crazy. I look at my kids that are now almost 21, but even like a couple of years ago, I'm like, gosh, I can't imagine like just letting them run loose and do this on a different continent. But I remember sitting on that park bench and like not knowing, how am I going to get to the appointment? I was like, just walk. So I would walk for hours. I would walk to appointments. And then I remember going to a freight forwarder at the airport in Toronto and saying, okay, this is what I need. I need rates from you for shipping stuff. And then they were like, okay, and then how are you going to pay for this? And I said, oh, I need credit line. And then, by the way, I also need part of your warehouse because I don't have a warehouse and I need to store this stuff somewhere and I need to repackage it. And I was very lucky because I always found people who believed in me and gave me a chance. And I really, today, I know that life just works like that. When your heart and soul is in something, and it really was, because I never for a moment, looking back, I think, what if this doesn't work? Like, I'm not going to be able to go to school next year because I have no money. Like, I never thought about this. I'm like, yeah, this is what I'm going to do. Like, there was never a safety net. There was never anything where I thought, okay, there's a plan B. There was never. And I had my heart and soul in it, and my faith, as in not a religious faith, but my faith in, yeah, of course this is going to work. I told my parents a few months later, and like once I came to them, I said, okay, can we do this together? Do you want to do this? Do you want to distribute the merchandise for me? And I remember my mom breaking down crying, said, oh my God, how did you do this? Like, my poor child. And I said, no, it was fine. Like, she said, you should have called us. I said, no, there was no way. I was going to do this on my own. I didn't want help.
That is a testament right there to a mindset. And I know this is probably something that you teach in coaching, but the mindset of, no, there's just no other option. This is the way I'm going to do it and it's going to work.
Yeah.
Versus people like, and I'm one of them. I'm totally one of them. I'm like, all right, I'd like to do this. Even this podcast, It took me a year to get this podcast off the ground. And finally, I just said, what am I waiting for? And I got it done. And you just didn't do that. You just were like, oh, okay, I'm broke. Big deal. I got college bills to pay. Big deal. I'll figure a way out of it. And you did. It's just, there was nothing else.
And I always,
it's a mindset within itself. Yeah.
If other people have done it, I can do it. You got to push through it. And yes, of course, there's moments where it's very uncomfortable. You're like, how do I get there? I walk for hours. And where do I stay? I don't know. Like back then, we had no cell phones. Like I would sit there and grab a yellow pages somewhere or something and like go through the phone book and say, who do I know? Who did I go to school with who lives in Toronto? Like, where can I couch surf? I slept on floors. But I was so focused. I'm like, I'm going to do this. I don't care how. So, yeah.
Like you said, you had a lot of people that believed in you. And that's part of it, right? Part of it is you've got finding some place to sleep and finding some place to crash. And if people believe in you, they're going to do that because they're probably going to get it back somewhere down the line.
Eventually, I went back to the freight forwarder after a couple of years, and because there was a funny situation after our meeting. He said, okay, let me walk you down to your car. And I'm like, oh God. I said, actually, I came with the subway. And he's like, oh, you walked quite a bit from the subway. And I'm like, yeah, that's okay. I enjoy walking. I'll walk back. And he was like, no, let me take you to the subway. And I'm thinking, I don't even have money to take the subway. And in Toronto, you drive into the subway area, into the drop-off area. And I'm like, I don't want to go there. I don't have money for a ticket. So eventually I told him, I said, okay, listen, I'm going to be really honest. I walked. He's like, from where? I said, downtown. It's like, are you serious? I said, yeah, I'm going to make this happen. And so he ended up giving me money for a subway. And he was like, here you go. Take a couple of bucks. Please go home. I'm like, yeah. And I asked him a couple of years later, I said, God, I thought when you were like, I'll take you to your car. I'm like, I don't have a car. Like, I seem like such a loser. But I was like, no, this is it. Either, what am I going to do? And he's like, no, I believed in you. I could tell you were determined to make this happen. And he's like, I had nothing to lose. Give you a warehouse for a month. See what you're going to do with it. And I became one of his best clients. I filled entire aircrafts with crap.
And it worked, and they got paid. So, of course, their risk and your risk together came out, and you got rewards out of it, right? Risk reward.
Yeah.
That's amazing. How long did you do that for?
Until they changed the laws where you could no longer import stuff. I was one of the reasons they did, because Oakley went to the highest court in Europe and said, this is not right. People can't do that. They can't import our goods if they don't have a license. And they shut it down in, was it 96 or 97? Probably something like that. And then I was like, okay. And at that time, I had a life partner. Him and we did it together. We split up the world into different parts. And we're going to do this all over the world. And so I had Europe, and he had Switzerland and Japan. And funny enough, all of Europe fell away for me, dead. And then, but Switzerland is not part of the EU. So he kept working, and Japan is fine. You can still do that there. So we continued doing that. And then my responsibilities shifted into, okay, I'm going to be more behind the scenes, and let's just build the retail operations so we can source more goods. So I did that for a couple of years. And then, when that happened for a few months, I was like, maybe I should get a real job. Maybe, so I have no regrets. This would be a good opportunity. Maybe I should get a real job. And I ended up working in marketing and market research for Ford. And I lasted 6 months, and then I realized this is the biggest BS. No way. I can't do this. But at least I did it. So, and then I quit, and I went back to doing, I started a company with oil painting reproductions. I worked together with studios in Europe, and we created reproductions of oil paintings. And I started selling these online. And that was really the beginning of e-commerce online. I remember Yahoo had Yahoo Shopping. So I started a shop on there, and I started with I called it the bread and butter of like the Monets and the Van Goghs and all of the famous paintings. And I started that, and then people started to order like custom paintings of things they saw at the Louvre or whatever. And I started to do that, and I started to do corporate work for I worked with Norwegian Cruise Line. We outfitted all the suites, like the nicer ones, with actual hand-painted reproductions. So I did that for a while. That was fun because I traveled a lot to Europe, and I worked with the studios, and I loved art, and so that was cool. And then I finally became pregnant. That was a challenge. That was probably one of my biggest challenges. And I ended up getting pregnant with twins. And that's like, even me, who was like, oh, I can do anything. I'm Superwoman. I was like, this is killing me. I can't do this. I can't run a business and take care of two babies. I can't. I never sleep anymore. I can't do this. And I ended up selling the business and took care of the babies. Probably.
Yeah. So you decided just to enjoy motherhood. How long did that last for somebody that's A type and serial entrepreneur?
I think it lasted for about 3 to 4 years when they were really little. Yeah, it was hard. It was really hard. But I realized, I'm like, I can't hand this over to somebody else. I tried for so long, and it was such a struggle to get there. And I'm like, I can't. I need to enjoy this.
You were thinking about getting a nanny or an au pair or something. You just decided that wasn't going to happen.
Well, at the very beginning, I tried to be Superwoman there too, and I tried to do it all on my own. And then after 6 weeks of never sleeping anymore, I was ready to run away and abandon everybody and everything. And I was like, oh my God, this is getting to me. I never sleep anymore. And then I got a night nurse for 6 weeks who helped me put these kids on a schedule. And at 3 months, they were both sleeping beautifully through the night. I'm like, okay, I'm okay again. I can function. And then I pretty much did it on my own for the most part. But
you still had a partner at that time?
Yes, I did. And then we ended up moving to New York and got into like construction, buying properties, building homes. I went into real estate, and then the big burst of the bubble happened. And at the same time, one of the properties, our main property at the time, which was like, I don't know, $5-6 million property, was put on fire, and the insurance didn't pay, and we lost everything. We lost everything we had ever worked for. Wow. And so that was a big bump in the road, and it really divided us because after the initial shock, and like, I was like, okay, what are we going to do? Like, let's start over.
Insurance paid nothing?
No, they paid very little, very little. All of our money was in this, and like multiple 7 figures, everything we had ever made. Yeah. And then they paid very little because there was one of the boxes. We had switched insurances halfway through or towards the end a little bit more. And one of the boxes wasn't checked that the previous part of the building was also insured with that. You know how like the insurance policies have like pages and pages of fine print, and we trusted the agent who sat down with us and said, sign here. And we did. And then the insurance was hiding behind that. And they're like, no, we're only going to pay for like the last, I don't know, month of construction. And it was nothing. It was one of the biggest fires Long Island ever had. It was unbelievable. It melted everything. It was a beautiful property overlooking the Long Island Sound. Even trucks that were parked in front of it melted. Like, it was crazy. They just had to let it burn out. And I remember standing there in the middle of the night with the police and fire department, and I was like, oh my God, this is unbelievable. And they were like, oh, don't worry about it. Insurance going to pay. And I'm like, okay. No, they did not.
Wow.
So
were you able to sell the land?
Yes, they did. Then right after that, the whole bubble burst and nothing was worth anything anymore. And yeah, my partner and I, we dealt with things very differently. And like I said, after the initial shock, I was like, okay, you know what? Let's look at it this way. This is exciting. We're going to start over. Let's do something new. Let's tackle a new project. We've both done this. We both have come from nothing. Let's do this. And he just looked at me and he's like, you're crazy. No way. And that was the beginning of the end. Yeah.
Oh, what else were you going to do? Especially you, who went from nothing to something and did it while you were in school and just kept going at it, selling businesses, coming back, being a success, coming back, being a success. So what else could you possibly do? I'm shocked, actually, that somebody like this who knew you, that this was a...
Yeah. For him, there was a lot of shame attached to it, of failure, which to me it wasn't. It was like, okay, it happened. Okay, I sure things could have gone different if we had read all the pages of this insurance thing, but we didn't. Like, and most people don't. And like, there was kids who put it on fire. They broke in there, they had a party, they smoked, and they put the cigarette butts into a big bin where there was like stuff from painting, and it caught on fire, and it was like a big chimney, and the whole thing burned down. Okay. It's life. And yeah, he felt very ashamed for what happened and that we lost it all, but I didn't see it that way. And I was like, oh, let's do something new. Let's find a new project. We're good. And,
Yeah. So let's pause right here for a second and see if we can get a lesson learned in, because I can feel it. It's like, it's here. It's just like right there. I can feel it because so I don't know if you read or anything, but I'm an endurance coach, and I get people crossing finish lines at marathons and Ironman and 135-mile races and Sahara Desert races and all that stuff. That's my thing. But there's always that. For me, it's an injury. Sometimes there's an illness. There's something that's going on, and that people take that same reaction that your partner took.
Mm-hmm.
So here's that lesson. It's like, so for you, again, down to nothing. What kind of lesson can we learn? Can we give the folks to sit there and say, hey, you know what? This happens. It's life. Here's the mindset we need to take to go forward.
Number one, life happens. The stuff is going to happen. It's going to happen to all of us, whether we're sitting homeless somewhere or broke or we lose something. Life happens, and that's just part of it. But for me, there's beauty in that, because there's always opportunity that, like, it's like a rebirth that comes out of that. Like, it's like, what do you say? The phoenix rising from the ashes. Like, there's this beautiful opportunity to start something new that is so exciting. And I feel like when we can focus on that, and which I've always done in my life, then it fills that void that's inside of us where we're like, oh my God, I don't have this. Or this thing that we could get hung up about. That void of the lack that we feel gets filled with this beautiful feeling, this excitement, this passion for something we can focus on. And that's what it feels like to me. And like, when I look back with everything I've gone through, I can redirect my focus. I take it off of what's missing or what's lacking or what went wrong. I'm like, okay, it happens. It happens to everybody. That's life. And then I shift and I'm like, and now what?
Mm.
And I get super excited about it. And yeah, it's just, it always works out. That's the thing. Life always goes on. It always works out.
So like creation out of chaos. So focus on the creation, not so much the chaos. So like anybody that the normal reaction would be, okay, like you said, all right, now what I don't have, what am I going after? And you focus there. Whereas a lot of people are like, okay, wait a second. How am I going to pay my next mortgage bill? How am I going to pay my next rent bill? How am I going to pay the utilities? Because I just lost everything. And you say, yeah, don't worry about that. Focus on the creation.
I mean,
isn't that right?
Yeah, I think there is worrying about it, which is distracting us from moving forward and getting into that what's next. But then it's real. Yes, we have to pay those bills. And somehow I just always made it. Like, even after everything burned down in New York, and then I knew we had to sell our house to get out of there. And I was ready to go back to Europe, but the father of my kids, my ex-partner, I was like, no, we're not going back to Europe. We're going back to California. We're going to get back to what we used to do. But in the meantime, I was sitting, and then he took off. I was sitting there with the kids. I'm like, you know what? Like, he's not here. There's no more money. So I started selling off stuff. I started selling off clothes and furniture and whatever else. And I'm like, okay, the fat days are over. There's no more lobster. There's no more anything. I remember we ate a ton of sausages and beans. That's it. But you make it through it. It goes on. Yeah, it's tough for a while, but okay.
Yeah. I know I had lean days too, and it was hamburger helper and potatoes. So I get it. I totally get it. The hamburger helper at the time was like 69 cents for the box. A pound of ground beef was like $3, and a sack of potatoes was $3. So literally for the week, I was good for the week at that point. But so I get it. Yeah, I've been there as well. All right. So that's our first lesson here. So, all right. So he went to California and you were still in New York. You started selling things off. Obviously, you were able to take some of that. And then what did you do from there?
And then we sold the house. I sold the house. And then which is funny because it was just when everything was going down on the stock market and everything. And one of the top executives of Lehman Brothers ended up buying our house. And as Lehman Brothers was like, are they going to be saved? Are they not? Are they going to be saved? Contracts were out to him. And every day it was like, okay, I'm going to buy the house. And then he was like, I don't think I can buy the house. And then he ended up buying the house. I'm like, oh my God. Oh crap. He ended up buying the house and we got out of there. And whatever we had left, we put into a little truck, and my ex actually drove it back cross country. And the kids and I got on Southwest at Long Beach Airport. And I remember standing at the airport with my two kids, one kid on each hand, and they were like 4 maybe at the time. And I looked at them and I started crying, but crying out of like gratitude. I looked at them and I thought, this is all I need. This is all that is important. Nothing else matters. Everything else comes and goes, and that's fine. But those two kids, and they're healthy, I won. Let's go.
Nice.
And I got on that plane and we flew back, and, we crashed at friends' houses for a little while until we could get an apartment, and it was a tiny little apartment. And today, somebody asked me the other day, it was like, what's your favorite place you ever lived at? And I was like, oh my God, it was this tiny little apartment right on the beach. Yeah. Out of all the big houses, the beautiful views, it was that. I felt so safe, and it was just the kids and I, and it was beautiful. It's my favorite place.
Wow. So just you and the kids at that point, because you said that
he was there for a little while, and then he was like, I can't be with you. And then he moved out, and
So you were letting him couch surf?
No, we at the beginning did this together, this wasn't, it was too much negativity. And I then tried to get a job. That's the second time in my life I tried to get a job. I'm like, I need a job fast. Like, I need to make some money. And I got a job with Deutsche Bank in downtown LA because of my language and my background, my MBA and all of that. And I drove home after the interview, and it was pretty clear that I got the job. And as I got home, and then I saw my kids, and I'm like, no way. I'm not taking the job. I will never see my kids again. Never. They're going to be in daycare. I'll drop them off at 6 a.m. so I can drive to downtown LA, and I come back and I just feed them and put them to bed. This is not it. I got it wrong. Something else is going to fall into place. Something else will happen. And that's when I started coincidentally, I started my next business without even knowing it. And it was jewelry I made for myself because there was still a lot of lawsuits going on with all the damages and the money we owed on the property and everything. And it was so stressful. And I made these necklaces for myself and I hand stamped them with words that were meaningful to me. And it was a little bit of a lifeline to remind myself that it's okay, it will be fine. And I started making those. And as I dropped my kids off in school, I picked them up. People were like, what are you wearing there? And I said, oh, it's just something I made for myself. And so they asked me, and I said, it's about celebrating the blessings in our lives, like focusing on that, shifting our focus. And it really resonated with people. And I got more and more people said, can you make me something? And I said, sure. What resonates with you? And then somebody said to me, you should make these and sell them. And I said, really? Yeah, okay. And that's when Etsy just started. So I went on to Etsy and I'm like, oh, that doesn't cost me anything. 20 cents, just list something. Let's do that. And that was 15, 16 years ago. And I started doing that. And I went from just me doing this while the kids were asleep or they were in school for a little bit. And today, Etsy is big. It's publicly traded, has 3.8 million vendors. And my little company today is number 40 in the world of all the Etsy vendors, of 3.8 million vendors.
So again, she goes from nothing. Someone says that she likes her jewelry that she makes privately for herself, and you turn it into a multi-million-dollar business because you make a couture customized jewelry, a jewelry shop, or basically manufacturing.
So I made it. Every piece was handmade by me. People would share their stories with me. They either knew what they wanted or I would help them figure it out. And I said, okay, here. And I would make that. And then I was like, oh my God, I have a dream. I have a dream to create a workplace for women where women can follow their passions, do what they love to do, and still be moms. Because for me, that whole thing of having to choose between a job and my children, I was like, that's horrible. We shouldn't have to do that. And so I created a workplace for women for that. And then my other thing was, I said, and then I want to give back. I want to give back to homeless children. And here in Long Beach, 30% of all kids that go to college here in Long Beach are homeless. So I started to tap into that, and I started to give back to different organizations and college students that are homeless because it was near and dear to my heart. And this whole thing became this beautiful love child. And I felt like I could, and I ended up getting back together with my ex and for a couple of years. But then when I really wanted to focus on this, and because he started to do better, and he was like, you don't need to do this anymore. And I said, no, but I really want to do this. I am very passionate about this. I want to continue this business. And he continuously was like, why do you want to do this? For your ego? You want to have a street named after you? And I said, no, you don't understand. This is important to me. There's a cause in this. There's a bunch of causes in this. And I'm very passionate about so many things about this. And when he really didn't get it and he constantly tried to undermine me, I said, this is it. I'm done. I need to get out. And that time I left. And I said, I want to focus on that. And I also wanted to show my kids that we got to follow our hearts. We got to do the things that are important to us. And now to you, you can unpack that.
Yeah, no, I don't know how to unpack that. I think you gave it everything that we needed from that. Is just, again, overcoming the obstacle. So, wow. So did you get out of that one room apartment after that? Just
so then
because it was
we did better, and we got back together, and we moved back into the lifestyle that we were accustomed to, and things went well, except the relationship didn't. And then when I decided to leave, because we were never married, so any of the businesses we shared, the real estate we shared, and so on, I had no right to. There's no, in California, if you're not married, you have no right to that. And I walked away, and I told him, I said, I don't care about the money. You can keep it all. And
yeah, but that was from the real estate holdings.
The real estate and business.
Your business was, you still had your business. So.
My business was my business. California is very expensive. And my kids at that point were going to private school. Like there was a lot of costs associated with that. And my business, which I couldn't really until then focus 100% on. Like at that point it was doing well, but it wasn't doing that well to support that entire lifestyle. So I walked out of the beautiful 4,000 square foot home overlooking the Pacific and a private beach to a 1-bedroom apartment. So I took my kids, the dog, and I went back to the 1-bedroom apartment. And I'm like, okay, we're starting again. All right. And now we're going to kick some ass. And that was like 7-8 years ago. And I started again. Yeah.
And did you ramp up what you already had?
Yes.
Okay, well, you said, it's at number 40. So.
Yeah, so I really kicked some butt and I grew it like in every aspect. And yeah, in the meantime, I had some cancer. I dealt with that. And
okay, hold on. That's huge. Don't gloss over this stuff. This is big, right? All right. Talk to me about the journey through the cancer.
So one of the things I didn't share was when I was 7 years old, my much younger brother, who was 3 at the time, he, by accident, swung a construction shovel into my face. And it broke my face. It broke my nose and my chin. And back then, my parents were like, stop crying.
Typical
German. Get over yourself. You'll be fine. And I remember they used to say, by the time you're married, you'll be okay. I'm like, okay. So they didn't really do anything about it. And then over the years, my nose had been broken and it started to really droop and my chin was pushed in. And only when I really started to make like some serious money, which was about like maybe like 10 years ago, I went to a plastic surgeon because I had like a little virus in my face. And my dermatologist said, go to a plastic surgeon. I'd never been to a plastic surgeon before. I was way down to earth. I'm like, I go into a plastic surgeon. But then I went and then he looked at me. He's like, oh, that in your face is fine. I'll give you some cream. But he said, what happened to your face? I said, oh, I got a shovel swung into my face. And he's like, what? And he's like, oh, we can probably fix that. And I'm like, oh, okay. He ended up fixing it. Was the biggest, most challenging health issue I ever had. It took me a whole year to overcome that. From like, they fixed my nose, put it back together. They did an entire open face surgery, took everything out, took all the cartilage out, scraped off all the scar tissue and put it back together the way it originally was meant to be. But they couldn't save my chin. So they actually ended up putting like a silicone chin in it to fix that. So I'm back to the way I originally would have looked. And then like I don't know, I get the time around, like 4 years later maybe, I noticed a spot on my nose and it turned out it was skin cancer. And I had dealt with skin cancer before. So I dragged my feet for a little bit. It got bigger and bigger. And then my daughter was the one who's like, Mom, you really need to go. So I went to get it looked at and they were like, yeah, this is skin cancer. We need to remove this. And it turned out they did this mole procedure where they cut and then they freeze it and then they cut and freeze until they have all the margins. And they ended up removing this entire side of my nose. And I was like, okay, this is way bigger. Holy crap, this whole side was missing. I'm going to go back to my friend, the plastic surgeon. He's going to fix this. He fixed my face before. He's going to fix this. So they covered it. I went home, I ate lunch, and then I got back in my car and I went to his office and I said, I need to show you something. Can you fix this? And he took it off and he was like, oh my God, Sabine. I said, yeah, they had to, I told him, and he's like, okay, we need to fix this. So he ended up taking cartilage out of him in the office right there. We never even went to the hospital. He did local anesthesia. I have never been in so much pain in my life. They took the cartilage out of my ear from the back of my ear and he rebuilt the cartilage up the side of my nose. And then he took skin out of my cheek and flipped it over. I still had to keep it attached so it wouldn't die off. It took I think 4 surgeries after this to complete this whole thing. It was a nightmare. But that looks fine.
Yeah.
He did an amazing job. And
if you didn't tell us, we wouldn't know.
No, it is a little uneven, but it's nothing. And all this, what they had to take out of my cheek and stuff, he's a true artist. He's amazing. And yeah, so that was a little debilitating for a little while. At that time, I was supposed to go onto the home shopping network and sell my stuff, and I had to cancel. I was like, I can't, looking like this, I cannot.
Right. Yeah.
So, and it scared me. It really scared me because I was like, oh my God, I got my face back only a few years ago, and now this, why? And it was a downer. It took me, with all the surgeries I needed afterwards, it took me a little while to really like get my energy back and go full force again. But I did. And so, yeah, that was that.
So you got through that. And at this time, you were still doing the jewelry?
Yeah, I was doing the jewelry, and that was all good. And then I want to say probably a year after that, I got surprised in the middle of the night, sleeping in my home. Somebody had broken into my house and attacked me in my sleep. And that emotionally was the biggest challenge in my life, the biggest one. He strangled me and then dragged me out of bed in my throat and beat the crap out of me, like badly. And then I thought I got my senses back, and I was on the 3rd floor of my house. I went downstairs and I thought he was gone, but he was sitting there waiting for me. And then he continued to beat me up and then tried to rape me. And because it turns out he was intoxicated, I ended up getting away. But I lived in a new construction, and I was 52 units, and there was only 2 units occupied. So while I was screaming my head off, nobody could hear me because there was nobody there. And then the other couple that had moved in also, so the other unit that was occupied, they did end up hearing me. And they came to my rescue. As I ran out, they came to my rescue, and that was tough. That was really tough. I had terrible PTSD. I started drinking, and it sent me into darkness. That was very scary.
Did they catch the guy?
Yeah, I knew him, actually. I knew him. And then what came afterwards was actually even harder because the legal system is not on our side, and I had to prove that he did what he did. And the thing is, once I went to the police, I finally it took me a couple of days to go because my head was I couldn't even think straight. And I remember the next morning I woke up curled up in a corner, like in fetus position, and I was like, oh my God. And I remember calling my plastic surgeon friend because I was worried, like, I couldn't feel anything. And I'm like, what's wrong with me? Like, how bad is this? And somehow I ended up driving myself. I don't remember any of it, but I ended up driving myself to his office. It was on a Saturday morning, like 7 a.m. I texted him. I said, I need help. You need to look at me. He said, okay. He didn't know. He said, okay, come on in. I always look at you. And he was like, oh my God. But it turns out he looked at me. He said, I don't think you have any internal bleeding, but you need to go to the police. And I didn't. Not for 2 days until I remember driving my daughter like the next day to a tennis match, and she was sitting next to me in the car, and she said, Mom, what are you going to do about this? And I said, I don't know. And it still makes me emotional thinking about this because she then said to me, she said, Mom, what would you do if this had happened to me? And I said, I would kill the guy. And she said, no, seriously, what would you do? And I said, okay, seriously, I would go to the police. I would make sure he pays for what he did to you. And she said, why don't you love yourself enough to do the same for yourself? And then I dropped her off and I ended up going to the police. But what came then was at least as tough as everything else, because once they heard who he was, what his family members, who they were, all the evidence disappeared. They had taken pictures, everything disappeared. There was no case. And I started a horrible struggle trying to get help. Nobody wanted to touch this. And at the end, I found a female attorney who was like, we're going to take care of this. And we did. It never really got what it deserved, but that was okay, because for me, it wasn't about revenge. It was about showing my daughter that you need to stand up for yourself, that this is not okay. And so, yeah, it was fine. It was fine. But it took me a long time to recover from this emotionally and spiritually. I was afraid to go to sleep at night. I started drinking and I didn't know how to get out of this. Yeah. And my family wasn't really all that supportive. My parents were like, I'm sure you deserve this somehow. Like, I was asleep in my house. They're like, you should just forget about it. And I'm like, forget about it. I'm black and blue. My foot is broken. Like, I can't forget about this. And I know it was from a place of love, because they were afraid that he was going to come after me and do more damage. But no. So the way I got out of this, and the lesson out of this, was I turned it around and it became one of the most beautiful gifts ever. I discovered a new lifestyle because of it. So where I lived in the front, there was an F-45 that opened up. And as they opened it up, they distributed flyers. And then one of the guys was walking around. He said, hey, have you tried this HIT training? And I said, no. He said, you should come in, try it out for free. So I ended up going. And I realized after the session, A, that I was about to die, because this was so tough. And I was in really bad shape at that point, that even though this was only a few feet between F-45 and my house, I crawled back into my house and I laid down in the entrance, and I'm like, oh my God. And I had 911 on speed dial. I was like, I think I'm going to have a heart attack. Oh my God, this is going to kill me. But then what came after that was beautiful. I felt better. And I realized, oh my God, when I work out, I can actually function. And so I got a membership and I started to train every day. I went there, sometimes twice, sometimes 3 times a day. I'm like, oh my God, I need to get my head cleared again. I'm going to go back. And then they had a competition, a global competition. And I ended up winning for female highest percentage body fat loss. No wonder, because I probably won more than anybody. And I lost all this weight to a point where I was like barely 100 pounds. I'm 5'5", and I was barely 100 pounds. And then COVID hit and they shut down. And I was like, what am I going to do? And because of the competition, in order to win this, like my competitiveness started to come out. I had to change everything. I stopped drinking. I started to eat healthy. I worked out. It changed everything. And then COVID hit, they closed. And I called up a friend of mine. I said, oh my God, I need to train somewhere. I need to continue this. This is my lifeline. And he said, okay, let me see who I can find for you. And he found a friend of his who owned a gym in LA. And he said, call him and see if he can help you. So the guy said, come in, I'll look at you. And so I went in there. He said, take off your clothes. I want to see what I'm dealing with. And I'm like, okay. So I took off my clothes and I stood there, and he was like, yeah, we can do something with this. And then he said, but I'm not going to babysit you. Either you want this or we're done. I said, okay. And it was like the movies. It was like Rocky. We went in there every day. The gym was closed. We couldn't have any lights on. We had all the blinds closed. There was no AC. And he worked out with me every day in the dark for like 2 to 3 hours every day. And I fell in love with bodybuilding, with the lifestyle, with lifting weights. Oh my God, it was the best. And I never felt better before in my life. I never looked better. I got into this community where people were so supportive. And it turns out everybody who was in there had a story. Everybody had a reason why they were there. And we all had the same goal. We're going to feel amazing. And we did. Like, I went religiously. I got up at 4:30 every morning. Sometimes I went twice a day. I did fasted cardio in the morning and then go lift in the afternoon. I was super strong. I leg pressed almost 700 pounds.
Wow.
I was one of the strongest women in there. And it was amazing. And people kept telling me, you should compete. I ended up going to Gold's Gym in Venice, and some of the big people, big trainers, big names, were like, you need to compete. And I always said, no, I don't want to compete. They were like, why not? And then I thought I did. And then we got closer, and I'm like, and then they try to tweak you, and they're like, oh, your traps are too strong. Your shoulders are not wide enough. We need to work on this. We need to work on that. I'm like, no. And then I realized it. And I was like, oh my God, this is the only place in my life where I truly do something just for myself, where I don't have to prove anything to anybody. I'm not a boss. I'm not a mom. I'm just doing this for myself. And I don't want to I don't want people to pick at me and say, oh, we need to change this and we need to change that. And this is not perfect. No. And I swore to myself, I will never compete. And people would always say, when are you competing? And I'm like, I'm not. And I'm like, you're doing this just because I love it. And because nobody's judging me. And I realized that at some point, I realized that I had this vision of seeing this guy standing on the other side of the river. And I realized I made it through this. And there was this raging river in the middle. And I realized I can forgive you because you have given me one of my greatest gifts. Change my life into something even more amazing.
Wow. That's a story. That is, well, that you've got into my side of my thing about fitness. Cause I have my model, the model that I have is for my business is it's by the race. I coach endurance athletes. So it's the race, you know what I mean? Sometimes they go to the race and then they come off the roster and they'll come back later when they decide they want to pick another race again. But I do know of a lot of other coaches that literally have clients behind clients and they're just there, like you said, for themselves. Mm-hmm. For me, when that's part of what life-changing challengers is, that challenge. You found the challenge through the process. And a lot of the people that I found changed their lives. They changed their lives to the goal, and the process taught them how to change. And both ways work, obviously, but that's incredible. So you never did compete ever?
No.
Wow. Good for you, because that's a lot of people. They'd be like, they're at that level, and people are telling them they've got a Gold's Gym on Venice Beach. That is that's the mecca of bodybuilders, and you've got those people telling you should compete.
Some of the biggest people, like Charles Class, the god of bodybuilding, he would always jump in and say, "Okay, now when?" And I'm like, "No, I don't care to do that." And a lot of women would be like, what do you mean you don't want to compete? Like, imagine standing on that stage and everybody's looking at you. You get your 20 seconds of fame. And I said, I don't care about that. It's not about that. My ego is not in this. No. Mm-hmm. And it was such a relief when I realized what it was really all about for me. And it made me even happier. Yeah. So
did you ever seek professional counseling or anything for the incident?
Yeah, I did. But it didn't. I ended up going back to spiritual mentors. And because I've tried, there was other things in my life that happened when I was a kid, and I had to deal with that and work through those issues. And I did a lot of therapy, and I always felt like, this is not working for me. This is not, And then I discovered spirituality, and really more specifically the science of mind, to really understand how minds work. And to me, that was fascinating. And it really helped me to understand myself better and really manage myself. And so continue this journey to get us to where I'm today. A lot has changed again. Just before COVID, I realized I don't want to do the business anymore. And I wanted to sell it. And because I realized I had checked all my boxes. Everything I wanted to achieve in life, financially and all of it, I had checked. And I realized nothing had changed. It didn't matter. And it really got me depressed. I was like, you know what? Set the bar higher, make more money, drive even nicer cars, live in a bigger house. No, I don't care. And I got so depressed that I was like, so what is there? What is this all about? And so I wanted to get rid of it all. But then I couldn't because of COVID. And I hung in there, and COVID in itself challenged me, and I enjoyed that because all of a sudden the business changed and I saw new opportunities, and I came back to life for 2 years, and I built the business. I restructured it and rebuilt it. And then a year and a half ago, I was like, okay, now I can sell it. And I ended up putting it on the market, and I sold it. And last year in June, I handed it over, and I'm still very active in it. I'm a consultant to them. I do everything that I really enjoy doing today. I don't have to do the day-to-day stuff anymore. But then my kids left. They graduated high school. Both of them went to Switzerland. And I was like, and now what am I going to do? And again, my daughter, who is wise beyond her years, she said to me one night, she said, Mom, you have worked so hard all your life. And now the world's your oyster. Do whatever you want to do. And I said, okay. So the business was sold. I went back to Europe. I had more skin cancer that was really bad. But then I went back to Europe after that was done the end of last year. And I said, I'm going to find a place I want to live. And I looked all over. I looked in Italy, and I was like, oh, I don't know. This is a rough start. Like, I don't know not enough about it. And at the end, I went back to my mountains. I went back to the German Alps. And I said, why don't I start there? So I looked for a place to rent, and people were laughing at me. They were like, nobody finds anything here, let alone a foreigner. I said, I'm not a foreigner. I'm German. What are you talking about? They were like, no, somebody dies, somebody needs to die. And then there's 10 other people in line to find something to rent. And I said, okay, see me do it. And a week later, I had a place. I commissioned accomplished. I had a place, and I flew back to LA, and I said, no, I'm going to put my house on the market. I sold everything. I sold my house. I sold my cars. I sold all my furniture, gave stuff away. And December 31st, I had 2 suitcases left. I got on the Lufthansa flight to Munich, and I left. Yeah.
Crazy. So
then I started over again, not financially, but emotionally. And I faced my biggest demon, the one that I could not manage throughout all of this. It was loneliness. All my life, I was so afraid to be alone. All my life. It's what drove me to drink more than I should have. It's, I think, what fueled my dedication to work. Spend every waking hour working. And I went to Germany, and I remember landing on January 1st, and I rented a car, and I drove to the mountains. I couldn't move right away into my place. I had to spend 10 days somewhere else. And I spent 10 days in a vacation home. I got really sick. First time in like 10 years. Never even had as much as a cold. I got really sick. And I laid in bed there, and I cried my heart out. I was like, what did I do? What did I do? I'm so alone. And I think it happened for a reason that I got sick. My body was like, you think you can just continue that life, and like you change locations, but you continue that life over here? Because I was like, I'm going to find a gym, I'm going to keep training, I'm going to find something else to do. And everything came to a screech. For an entire week, I was laying in bed, fever, and just so painful. And then I came back to life, and I still tried to get my old life back over there. And then I realized, actually, my boyfriend who lives here in the US, he said, what did he say? You can change, you can take you can take the girl out of the city, but you can't take the city out of the girl. Right? You have a lot of work to do. And I did. And it was 3 months of, it was a struggle to face that, to really, I'm like, I can't believe I did this. I can't believe I put myself into a situation where I'm deep into the mountains. I don't see people for days. And I put myself into solitary confinement to deal with this, the biggest challenge. And I did. I learned to embrace my solitude, and I filled that void of like that painful. And I started drinking again, where I was like, just a whiskey, make myself feel better. And then I realized, oh my God, the Band-Aid's got to stop. It's a Band-Aid. We have Band-Aids, whether it's shopping, which like I'm not a shopper and I wouldn't be able to do that. There's no shopping. There's nothing. There's no hairdresser. There's no shopping. There's nothing. And there's what people do, drugs. I've never done drugs. People do, they drink or they eat excessively. None of that. And for me, it was always, I'm going to drink whiskey. It's going to numb the pain. And then I realized it one evening and I took the bottle and I poured it all down the drain. I'm like, no, this has got to stop. You got to face this. There's no running away from this anymore. There's no numbing the pain. Face it. And I did. Yeah, I did. And then I knew once I was over this, like, and now you can come back to LA and visit your friends and visit my son. My son's back here now. And yeah, and I feel like a different woman. And I came back here with very mixed feelings. I'm like, I don't know if I want this anymore. I don't know if and I stopped working out. I work out, but I don't train anymore. I canceled. I had a membership at a gym. I'm like, I'm going to cancel this. I'm going to find other ways to entertain myself. And I ended up renting an e-mountain bike. And I'm like, oh, I like that. And I ended up buying one and I'm zipping through the mountains now. And I have a gym I go to, but only a couple times a week just to have fun. I don't have a plan. And that was hard too, because I looked at my body and I'm like, what the heck happened? You went from like super strong and tight to menopause. Wow. Holy crap. So yeah, it's been really interesting, really amazing, so amazing. And I discovered all the things that along the years I wanted to do, and I never did because I was too busy working and focusing on all these other things. And I wrote my first book and I published it I wrote it within like a month and I published it. And as you said, I have a podcast that I love doing. And I coach other people. I help other people to change their lives to the way they really want to live their lives.
That's powerful. Yeah. So her podcast is called the Power Life Podcast. And she drops episodes every Monday. So now all of you know what to do. You first listen to Life-Changing Challengers, and then you move over to the Power Life Podcast. Okay? And that's how we're going to do this, because Life-Changing Challengers drops on Mondays too. All right.
There you go. Your Mondays are safe, people.
You're
safe.
good. You're good. On the way in, you listen to Life-Changing Challenges to work. On the way back out, you listen to the Power Life Podcast. We've got you covered, people.
Yes.
Exactly.
The bite-sized nuggets, I usually try to keep it between 10 and 15 minutes, but I'm very raw and I talk about all of this on how, and also the stuff that's going on like right now and what I feel and how I work through these things. And it's real, it's raw, it's authentic. And yeah.
Cool. Yeah. So that's perfect, because what we want to do here is we want to highlight people that have done this and given some nuggets on, okay, these are some ideas on how you could change it. Then you go over to the Power Life Podcast and get into the details on how to do it.
Yes.
This is a partnership made in heaven.
It is.
It's been manifested.
When I saw your podcast, I'm like, oh my God, this is it. Yes.
Yeah.
Yes.
So,
we need to talk.
yeah, no, and I just like it. And also I think we're about in the same peer group too. And most of my clients, and this podcast is dedicated to that midlife 40s, 50s type of deal. Not that all of you in your 20s and 30s can't get something out of it, because there's a lot of life lessons learned in this podcast and in the Power Life podcast that you could learn before you get to a point where you're deciding that, oh, something's got to change. Now you'll have all these great lessons ready to go so that if and when that happens, you're ready to rock. So that's amazing. And also Sabine's book is the Love Odyssey, right? And the quote there is, "Are you ready to love again?" So why don't you tell us just a little bit about that one?
So when I was working with a producer for my podcast, and I remember going to him, and he was referred to me and said, talk to him, he can help you with the production. And I had a call with him. He's like, so what do you do? And I said, I'm a life coach and life and business coach. And I looked at him and he goes, oh, another one. Like, okay, all right. And then he said, okay, why don't you put something together? We'll do a test recording and see how it goes. And I said, sure. So we met online. He hit the record button and I started talking, and then I was done. And he was sitting there like this, just like, and I was like, done. And still didn't move. I said, okay, I'm done. And he stopped it. And then he's an older guy, and he looked at me and he said, I don't give compliments. I said, okay. I was scared. At that point, I'm like, oh, this must have been really bad. Oh my God. There goes that dream. And he's like, this was freaking amazing. And I said, oh, okay. He's like, I'm taking you. I'm like, okay. So I did a few, and then every time he produced these, and then I think it was like 3 or 4 episodes in, he said to me, he said, you need to write a book. I said, I know, I always wanted to write a book, but I don't know. Like, I don't know how to do this. He said, just write a book. And I said, okay. So the first thing that came to mind, I thought, this is easy. How about I write about the notes that I took throughout after my ex and I split up, which I called my dating project. Like, I made that into a research project because I was so terrified to get back out there. I'm like, oh, I don't want to do this. This is a nightmare. And so I took notes, and I was like, I could actually finally write this. And that was easy. And the moment I started writing, it just all came out. And it's a little book. It's like 60, I think, 9 pages. It's a really little book, but it's written from my heart and soul of midlifers and the dating. And it's fun, but it has a lot of insightful little nuggets in it. And it's interesting, the feedback. It became a bestseller in like, I think 3 or 4 categories on Amazon. And I'm like, wow. And it's one of my new discoveries of how much I love writing. I love to write. I'm working on my second book right now, even though it's a little bit on the shelf because I had to get through these last 3.5 months, and it gave me a lot of new insights, and I need to get back to that. But it's happening. It's going to come eventually. And yeah, it's for me, and I feel like I have come full circle. I have discovered something new, something that I really love to do, which is the writing and the podcasting, which is also writing, and even social media. I'm on LinkedIn, and I used to hate social media, and I never even did it for my previous business. But with this, it's different. It's like it just pours out of me, and I can write like raw and authentic the way I am. And it seems to resonate with people. And that's, it's filling it. I learned to fill that void of the pain from being lonely. I realized that the antidote to loneliness is purpose. And over the last 3 months, really 4 months now, I have discovered my purpose for this part of my life. And every time I deal with something where like my daughter came to visit me for a weekend and then she left, and I was like, oh no, I was crying because I'm like, I'm going to miss her so much, and I'm back to my solitude. And I walking up the stairs to my apartment and in the mountains. And by the time I got upstairs, I'm like, I'm good. All right, let's sit down. And there I am, and I'm filled with joy and bliss, and I'm like, this is it. This is it. And that void, I know how, again, like at the beginning, we said I can redirect my focus. I have learned to do that with other things now. So with the loneliness, which was so dreadful for me, to redirect it to something I am so passionate about. And that fills me with so much joy and bliss. And that's really, I think that's one of the secrets to life, to deal with the darkness, to really, because we all have darkness and we all deal with things, but the darkness in itself is not dangerous. I feel like the darkness is actually, it's information. It's like a red guide pole that comes up and it's like, wait a second, something needs attention. And then once we put light on that darkness, say, okay, what's going on? Like, what is it? What fear, what pain, what struggle is it? And once we put light on it, it actually becomes really beautiful. And that's where I'm at today. It's like, there's no more band-aids. There's no more ignorance. There's no more trying to numb it. There's like, okay, what's going on? And then fill it, turn it into something beautiful. And it's amazing.
That's super powerful, Sabine. You fill me with light. And I'm sure that anybody that gets to watch or listen to this is going to feel the same way. Just the fact that you being broke and then into businesses and then broke again and then have kids and then then cancer troubles and then broke again and then, oh my God. And then going through some domestic violence and here you are on top of it, 2 great kids, and you're living in a dream place where you dreamed about since you were a kid. I mean, full circle. I can't say more about how amazing you are. You know what I mean? So yeah, jump on the bandwagon, kids, because this woman's got it. So again, from her podcast to her book, everything's going to be in the show notes. I'm going to have a link directly to the book. I will link directly to her podcast. And she is, do you follow, are you mostly on Instagram and LinkedIn? So if people want to get in touch with you?
So LinkedIn is really my main thing. I am on Instagram also, the Power Life Coach. I don't post it as often, but I'm there. I try to get myself to be active.
Right. But the fact is that you're a big portion of it is not life coaching, and you're also a business coach. So that would most likely lead more towards LinkedIn than it would any of those.
Yeah. It's interesting though, the people who contact me and want my help, they usually come say, I need help with my business. I need to grow my business. And then within usually one conversation, we realize that the pain point is somewhere else. And once we tackle that, the business always grows on its own. It always does. And that's the thing I realized over the years too. When it comes to business, when you lean into, like, I always say, the inner game determines your outer gain. That's my thing. And it never fails. When you put light on the inside and you work on your inside and you get to really authentically lean into what you're doing, it always works. It always thrives. It never fails. So it's interesting because, yes, I have a bunch of clients right now I work with, and they all came for business advice. And then we realized, wait a second, where's the problem here? It's really not the business. Let's look at this. Let's start digging. And as we start digging and work on these things, they're like, so weird. Business is picking up. It's not weird. It's all connected. You're one person. It's all connected. So yes, I do have the business background. I have the education. I have had 7 businesses altogether. I know my crap. Like, I can be very helpful with that. But what's going on in here, that's usually top priority. And then we look at the other stuff. The other stuff is minor. It's like, yeah.
Wow. You heard it here, folks. All right, say it one more time. The inner...
Your inner game determines your outer gain.
There you go. Your inner game determines your outer gain. That is words to live by. With that, I cannot end this podcast on a higher or better note than that. Sabine, thank you so much. It has been an honor.
Thank you. Thank you. It was such a pleasure hanging out with you and talking to you.
Thank you again. All right, folks, we will see you in the next one. Well, that wraps up another episode of Life-Changing Challengers. I'm your host, Brad Minus, saying thank you for joining us on this journey of transformation. If today's stories inspired you, please take a moment to review, share, and follow us on your favorite podcast platform. Your support helps us reach more listeners and create an even bigger impact. Remember, every challenge is a chance to grow. Until next time, keep pushing, keep challenging, and never stop pursuing your extraordinary.